Roy enters the middle of a fighting ring, not retouching his ambitions in the MMA universe, continuing to get involved in underground competitions. As the fight breaks out, former MMA fighter Roy manages to knock his opponent down. However, his return to Lisa, his lover, opens a gap that allows the opponent to recover and change the course of the confrontation. Roy's defeat has serious repercussions for Julian, his client, and ruthless mob leader. Julian accuses Roy of underperforming, attributing it to distractions with Lisa, and to express his displeasure, punishes her in front of Roy by executing Lisa. Later that night, Julian reveals an ingenious plan to Roy: the clandestine warehouse full of valuable diamonds resulting from mining operations. With full confidence in Roy's skills as a seasoned truck driver and the military connections of his brothers Joe, ex-military, and Danny, still active, Julian assigns Roy to transport these shiny treasures safely from Vegas to Baja. The motivation behind Roy's choice becomes clear. His clean record and the military support of his brothers are a perfect combination for this delicate mission. However, emphasizing the importance of the task, Julian also uses threats to secure Roy's cooperation, and the latter, aware of the risks, accepts the offer of a substantial reward of $1 million. With no other alternative, Roy decides to contact Joe. But Joe, still upset with him, refuses to answer the call. The next day, Danny goes to see Joe and brings up Roy's unsuccessful appeal. Joe expresses his frustration, noting that Roy only seems to seek him out when he needs something. During their tense conversation, Roy arrives unannounced. Instead of a friendly welcome, Joe greets him harshly, making Roy regret coming. Joe later consoles Roy and they have a private conversation. Roy invites Danny for a long ride to Baja, and Danny agrees. In the following scene, the brothers begin their journey on the road. After a long drive, they stop at an underground fighting arena operated by Roy's friend. They witness a fierce fight between Big Duke and Barney Boy, with Big Duke winning due to his strength. The event host invites anyone to challenge Big Duke, and Roy steps up, ignoring his brother's advice. Roy defeats the opponent using a chokehold. The next morning, they continue their trip in the truck and arrive at the diamond warehouse. There, they meet Julian's associate, Paulie, who shows them the crates containing hidden diamonds inside drink bottles. They load a container worth $50 million onto the truck and head for Baja. During their journey, Roy notices a low fuel level and stops at a gas station. While refueling, they go to a nearby convenience store for food and drinks. A group of masked armed gangsters appear outside the store and rob Roy's truck. One of them manipulates the truck's wiring to start it without the keys, while others create a distraction by firing their guns, killing the shop owner. The thieves then flee with the stolen truck. In an effort to stop them, Roy fires shots, but his attempts are unsuccessful. Danny is left confused about the situation and the identities of the culprits. However, Roy doesn't have the time to explain, so he instructs his brother to get into the store owner's car before they give chase. They eventually catch up to the thieves, but when the criminals start shooting, the brothers are forced to halt their pursuit. Danny demands explanation for what's happening, and also wants to know the contents of the truck. With no other options, Roy finally reveals that the truck contains valuable, uncut diamonds worth $50 million, which belong to a ruthless mafia kingpin. Soon after the failed delivery becomes known to Julian, he becomes furious and suspects that Roy has betrayed him and run off with the diamonds. Later that evening, Detective David Johnson and his team of police officers arrive at the scene to investigate. They find Roy's abandoned truck in the middle of the road, but have little to go on. The next morning, masked gangsters return to the same diamond warehouse. It is revealed that they are working for Paulie, who deliberately sent them to steal the diamonds, framing Roy and his brother in the process. Meanwhile, Roy and Danny find themselves stranded in the desert, as their car has been damaged by gunshots. As they walk, Danny reflects on his big brother's troubled life and regrets joining him on this journey, vowing not to accompany him on any future trips. In the next scene, we see Joe returning home from the grocery store. He discovers his house in disarray. He frantically searches for his wife and daughters, but cannot find them. It appears that Julian has kidnapped them as a result of Roy's actions. After a long walk, Roy and Danny finally reach an area with a phone signal. Danny notices multiple missed calls from his brother and returns the call. Upon answering, Joe is informed about the kidnapping, but remains unaware of the full situation. Roy reveals that he knows who is responsible. Joe becomes furious upon hearing Roy's voice and threatens to harm him if anything happens to his family. Following this, Roy contacts Julian. He explains the robbery incident and promises to return the diamonds. Julian gives him 48 hours to get the diamonds back, failing which he threatens to hurt Joe's wife and daughters. Upon hearing this, Danny and Joe felt a deep sense of disappointment that their family's safety had been jeopardized for the sake of an illicit business. Nevertheless, they couldn't afford to squabble with each other at this critical juncture. Something more significant was on the line. Consequently, the three brothers resolved to collaborate and embark on a mission to rescue their family. While waiting for Joe to arrive at their designated location, Danny and Roy were spotted by Detective Johnson and his partner. The detectives chose not to apprehend the brothers due to insufficient evidence. Instead, they opted to closely monitor their activities. Meanwhile, Joe made his way to a concealed underground bunker where he had stockpiled an arsenal of weapons. He collected rifles and ammunition before heading towards his brother's location. After a few hours on the road, he encountered his brothers, and his first action upon exiting the Jeep was to punch Roy in the face. Subsequently, the trio advanced towards Julian's mansion, unaware that they were being trailed by two detectives. They arrived at the mansion in the morning, with Joe, a former soldier, leading his brothers inside. Employing military tactics, they systematically neutralized the guards posted outside the mansion. Joe and Roy then entered the mansion, while Danny assumed a sniper position to provide cover from outside. In the midst of these events, Paulie also arrived and entered Julian's room, where the mafia leader was in the company of two women. Julian reprimanded Paulie for interrupting his private time, but it was clear that Paulie had ulterior motives. He shot the two women and admitted to being the mastermind behind the diamond heist. Paulie further claimed that the diamond business belonged to his family, with Julian being merely his uncle's adopted son. Thus, Paulie was there to take control of the operation. The conversation was abruptly disrupted by gunshots from outside. Seizing the opportunity, Julian incapacitated Paulie. Moments later, Joe and Roy burst into the room, holding Julian at gunpoint. However, they couldn't execute him right away because they still lacked information about their family's whereabouts. This gave Julian enough time to incapacitate Joe and confront Roy. Suddenly, Paulie rose, seized a pistol, and shot both Joe and Julian. He then instructed his men to load Roy into a vehicle to transport him to their base. Julian perished on the spot, but Joe managed to survive. Shortly afterward, Danny, having lost contact with his brothers, rushed into the mansion. But Roy had already been abducted. Together, the two brothers traced Roy's phone location and set off to rescue him. On the way, Danny contacted his fellow student Jimmy, asking him to join them with the necessary weapons. At the base, Roy found himself surrounded by Paulie's armed guards, who also held Joe's wife and daughters captive. Paulie devised a brutal challenge. Roy had to battle one of his most formidable enforcers, with the promise of his family's release if he emerged victorious. Roy accepted the challenge, but his exhaustion from previous ordeals made it a daunting task to match his opponent's strength. Meanwhile, Joe, Danny, and Jimmy infiltrated Paulie's base. Jimmy positioned himself at a distance and systematically eliminated the guards one by one. Simultaneously, Joe and Danny advanced, neutralizing guards along their path. In a parallel scene, Roy summoned every ounce of his remaining strength to ultimately defeat his opponent using an MMA maneuver. At this point, Paulie became aware of his guards being eliminated and decided to make an escape. His efforts proved futile as the brothers eventually cornered him. Joe was on the verge of executing him, but the timely arrival of the detectives, along with the police force, prevented an unlawful act. Disregarding the 30 other individuals who had been killed, when Joe's wife and daughters were freed from captivity, the mayhem stopped. Detective Johnson seemed indifferent to the 30 lives the brothers had killed, instead thanking them for helping to capture the mafia figures the FBI had been chasing for years. The three brothers united in the final scene, resolving their conflicts and repairing the fractures in their relationship. Roy, demonstrating a profound change of heart, chose to abandon the underground fighting scene, opting instead to lend a hand to Joe on his farm. This decision marked a significant turning point, showcasing the transformative power of reconciliation and the strength of familial bonds.